Hello, this is Joshua Coleman, and I am doing my oral exam. I have my questions in front of me and a few notes. I'm just gonna go at it. So, number one, what constitutes the best explanation, and how is it applied to the resurrection? Well, the distinguished historian Brian McCullough, he's a historic, and he provides he provides criteria to establish historical accuracy in hypotheses. And we're going to go through those, and we're going to attribute them to the four facts of the resurrection. One being that the historical documents attest to Jesus. Number one, being buried in a tomb of Joseph of Arimathea. Number two, the tomb was the tomb of Jesus was found empty early Sunday morning, 3 days after his crucifixion by a group of his women followers. Number three is the post-mortem appearances to the disciples and to others. And number four, the newfound faith and the rapid spread of Christianity, more specifically to the disciples and their newfound faith. Number one, criteria. The hypothesis must imply other present casual realities. That it has to be confirmed by other accepted beliefs, generally accepted beliefs. Turn the screen off. Okay, there we go. Again, like I said, number one criteria: the hypothesis must imply other present causal realities. This hypothesis that it accounts for pretty much all of history, well, at least the last 2,000 years of history. It counts the spread of Christianity into Rome, especially the rise of the church, and even the establishment of the theocracy in Rome, and how it's lasted even to this day, that the theocracy still exists in Rome with the papacy and so forth. Not saying that that's where the true, the no, never mind. Not gonna chase any rabbits here, but anyways, so it does, and it also accounts for probably over a third of the population on Earth are confessing Christians, or at least 1.5 million Christians alive on the planet today. It would account for that truth, the account for the truth of history, and so yeah, other true statements. It does imply further true statements. Number two criteria would have to the the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead has to have explanatory scope. And how so the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead, it explains all these evidences. If God raised Jesus from the dead, it explains, well, one, after the crucifixion, that Jesus was buried, and that the tomb was found empty. It explains both of those. It explains that this is why the women showed up and the tomb was empty, because God had raised Jesus from the dead. And since, if the hypothesis is true that God raised Jesus from the dead, then it would explain the post-mortem appearances. That Jesus did. He did appear to people over about a period of about 40 days, what many New Testament scholars believe was a period of 40 days. Jesus appeared to the disciples, to the women, to some writer, Paul, in his letter to the Corinthians, said he appeared to over 500 men at one time, and these men are here for questioning. Most of them are still alive to be questioned about the post-mortem appearances that explain that. And of course, if God raised Jesus from the dead, if that hypothesis is true, it would explain the newfound faith in the disciples. It would explain how a group of guys that just deserted Jesus the night he got arrested, were cowering in a locked room, would all of a sudden be bold to go confront the Jewish leaders, the Roman leaders, and who would take this belief that they saw the risen Lord, that they had the revelation of him, and everything that they said is true, that they took to their death. What extra biblical sources say that even from enemies said that even suffering, even torture, that these Christians wouldn't recount this faith. So it would explain all 4 of the established facts of the resurrection. The third criteria, it'd have to have good explanatory power. Like I just went over, there's no contradictions. It fits all 4 of the criteria. So it doesn't just fit 1 or 2 or 3, and then but it contradicts this one over here, such as the conspiracy theory and the hallucination theory. It has to have great explanatory power. Again, the fact that this hypothesis it just makes it more probable, which brings us to the 4th criteria, that the resurrection is more plausible than not. There are no contradictions. If we look at Jesus' personal life, his claims to divinity, and even his confessions that this was going to happen, that I'm going to die in the hands of the Roman, or in the hands of the Jewish leaders and crucified under Roman rule, but then 3 days later I'm going to rise again. Those kind of claims, and even the extra biblical claims from skeptics, from doubters, from Roman historians, that Jesus was at least a good moral teacher. And if we take that into account, that it's very plausible that God would raise this one man, Jesus, from the dead. Number 5, for a hypothesis to be good and valid, it cannot be ad hoc. It can't be less contrived. You can't have to explain other portions of it, and the resurrection theory fits this one as well. The only other arguments you would have to consider would just be the rejection of naturalism. If God exists, there's no reason not to believe that he acts in his creation and that he can raise Jesus from the dead. And also, of course, the reliability of documentation, which the majority of New Testament scholars do hold to some reliability of these. That's where we get the 4 established facts out of the historical documentation. There's over 5,000 surviving copies of the New Testament documents. 25 of those documents go within the generation contemporary with the time of the eyewitness accounts. So yes, it's less ad hoc. You can rely on the scriptures, and if you reject naturalism, then there's no reason to believe that God did in fact raise Jesus from the dead. The 6th criteria, it cannot be disconfirmed by other accepted beliefs, which would be naturalism. Say, dead men don't rise, which that's not the theory we're coming against with the hypothesis that God raised Jesus from the dead. It's not that dead men don't rise, but dead men don't naturally rise from the dead. So again, that naturalism comes into account, and we'll talk about it a little bit later when we talk about the weakest link in the resurrection. And the 7th criteria, this hypothesis must exceed all other hypotheses, which it does, which we'll go over here in the next video. This one's almost about 10 minutes done, but it does, as I just went through, it fits the first 6 criteria, and it does, and here I'll explain that it exceeds the other hypothesis. We'll consider the oldest secular explanation, and then we'll go over the hallucination theory just a little bit later.